Hello there and welcome to my YouTube. Today, well, we're going to take a look at some colour footage, fairly rare colour footage from World War II with the RAF, and we're also going to hear an interview with Squadron Leader Ginger Lacey, who was one of the most successful Battle of Britain pilots in the Second World War, and he shot down in total 28 aircraft. And we're going to have a listen to his interview back in 1978. He was also an advisor on the Battle of Britain film that came out in the mid-60s. So hope you can sit tight and enjoy hearing what he has to say.
You were, a sergeant at that time. Were you living in mess, or where were you billeted?
Well, it was, if you're talking about 1940...
July to October, yeah.
Well, in July we were at Gravesend, which was a civilian airfield which had been taken over by the Air Force. So we moved in there. There was no proper accommodation. We were living in a requisitioned house just off the airfield.
What were you doing before you went into the Air Force, and when did you go in?
Well, I was, before the war, I'd taken an instructor's course with the Volunteer Reserve, and I'd obtained a job as a flying instructor with the Yorkshire Aeroplane Club at Yeadon. And then when the war started, we were all flying east of a line which included us was cancelled. We weren't allowed to fly at all, and two or 3 days before the war started, we were all mobilised. I was being a sergeant on the Volunteer Reserve.
So flying was going to be your life if there'd been no war?
Oh yes, I already was. I was a flying instructor, yeah. And by the time the war started, I got 1,000 hours in.
What sort of background was your family? Was there...
My father was in farming, and I'd had no wish to take up farming, so and he'd no wish for me to join the Air Force. So I became chemist apprentice, and did 3 years of that. By that time, my father had died, and my mother sort of said, "Rightio, if you wish to join the Volunteer Reserve, you may do so," which I did, and carried on flying from there.
Right, so we've got you to Gravesend near Gravesend in 40. You weren't on the station, so first thing in the morning, what was the routine? How did you get woken, and what was the first thing that went through your head in the morning?
Well, approximately an hour before dawn, we would get a call by a corporal from the guard room, who you put the call in for the previous evening, and you got a call. You'd have a cup of tea, you'd have breakfast. You'd get out to your aircraft. At Gravesend, we walked up from the house to the airfield, which was not very far, a couple of 100 yards. Walked up, did checks of the aircraft, got our parachutes out, put them on the tailplane, fitted our helmets in the aircraft, hung them over the reflector sight or over the control column, and then made ourselves as comfortable as possible waiting for the first call. We always were on readiness, if we were on readiness, that is, about half an hour before dawn, before anything was likely to happen. So it was pretty early, and as we stayed on readiness till about half an hour after sunset, it was pretty late when we finished in summer. But of course, the one squadron didn't do the whole day. It would be on, say, readiness in the morning up till lunchtime. Then another squadron would take over and take over the readiness as from then, and we would go on to available, which meant that you had to be able to get in the air in 20 minutes or something like that. Can't remember the actual time. You couldn't go away if you were unavailable.
Is it too much to ask you to recall what it felt like the first thing you were called in the morning? I mean, did you wake up in a state of any tension, or did you wake up thinking, Christ, what's the weather going to be like, or what can you remember?
I remember that if it was pouring with rain, there was a big sigh of relief and everyone went back to sleep again. Sometimes, of course, you still had to get up and be there in case the rain cleared. But there was never quite the tension on a bad day that there was on a good day. If the sun was shining brightly and not a cloud in the sky, well, then you knew that you were going to have a lot of work to do that day.
Dispersal. Now, by then, sergeants, or at this time, sergeants, pilots were mixing with officers, and you were all in the same dispersal.
Oh, yes, we were all in the same dispersal.
And passing the time somehow.
Yes.
How?
Well, what you normally did was you went out to your aircraft, which was some distance away from where your hut was or where your telephone was, and you lay under the wing and try to get some extra sleep in. The main thing that remains in my mind now about the Battle of Britain was I was always tired. If you came down from a trip and it was the usual hot, blazing summer day that 1940 seems to stick in my mind as being, you climbed out of your aircraft, and if the intelligence officer didn't come along to you to take a combat report, if you'd had a combat, if he didn't come along to take it, you didn't bother to go to find him. You just got into this wing of the aircraft and tried to get some more sleep in. And then probably you'd be scrambled from there and get off another trip, and you never would get a report of that trip.
Some of the time, though, if you couldn't sleep so well, you must have read or wrote home, or...
Oh, yes, all those kind of things were going on at the same time. Reading was a very, very popular pastime. Writing home was not quite so popular because the people at home wanted to hear that you weren't even involved in the war, and you actually were. You were the really sharp end at that time. And that one thing you sort of didn't want to write and worry your people at home about.
Can you remember the sort of tenor of some of your mother's letters to you at that time?
No, I don't think so. I can't remember that at all. Letters from mothers were all sort of domestic things, how the dog was keeping and how my brother was doing at university and things like that. I can't really remember sort of any sort of thought of worry in her letters at all.
You presumably look forward to getting them. Or was mail important at that time? Can you remember? People wait for it?
Well, it was important, but never ever assumed the importance that they, to us, that it seems to do to people making films about submarine warfare and ships at sea.
Yes, all right. Now, at some point in this morning, you would presumably get a scramble. Now, films have done it with telephone bells and with somebody hitting a great big bell. What was it like in your case? Can you take me through a scramble? Can you explain from the point of view laying under the wing what you heard and what you had to do for those next few moments before you got airborne?
If you were the squadron or the flight was at readiness, one pilot would be detailed to be on the operations telephone. That was merely so that it wasn't that we didn't trust an airman or a corporal, but it was better to have a pilot there in case some information, flying information, was given at the same time or slightly before the controller said scramble. every time the ops phone rang, everybody'd ceased doing what they were doing, and one ear was listening out, and they would be, the pilot who'd picked up the phone would either go wave one hand and indicate that it was not a scramble, or if it was just getting the information, he'd have a hand up as much as say, get ready to go. And he would either say scramble if he got no further information, if he had any further information as to 50 plus coming in from the south or the east or at such and such a height, he would pass that on, and then we'd all rush out to the aircraft. Everyone roaring start up at the same time. The airman who would be sitting in the cockpit, the fitter who was sitting in the cockpit, would start the engine. While he was starting the engine, would pull on the parachute, which was on, as I had been laid out on the tailplane. All he did was just ducked under the strap, put it on, started pushing the quick release straps into the box on the centre of the chest. And by that time he should have had the engine going. You leapt up onto the wing on the left-hand side where the step was. As you leapt up on the left-hand side, he leapt over the right-hand side and stood there waiting to strap you in. As soon as he got the four straps over, and then you were taxiing out following your leader. Unless, of course, you were the leader, and then you taxied out and everyone followed you.
Well, what was it like taxiing out? They're not easy planes to... Are we talking about Spits, are we?
No, I'm talking about Hurricanes at that time. You could taxi in a Hurricane as fast as you liked. The undercarriage was as strong as a fourth bridge. But there wasn't much taxiing out in so much as it would be a case of if you're all lined up on one side of Gravesend Airfield, it was a grass airfield, and regardless of the direction of the wind, you just whammed the throttle open and went in that direction, straight off from the dispersal point, and climbed away, forming up into squadron formation as you climbed away, and picking a direction given you by the controller over the RT. The radio wasn't very much good in those days. We had about an old-fashioned HF set which you had to tune, and the communications as they existed then wouldn't be put up with for 10 minutes a day, or 10 seconds.
I did read one account in which somebody said that they would actually listen to ordinary radio if they were on patrol at that time. You could actually tune.
Yes, you could tune, yes. But if you tuned to ordinary radio, you didn't get any information from your squadron commander or as to, whether he'd seen any aircraft or not. I can hardly really believe that anyone deliberately tuned to ordinary radio. But I do know that when we first went to France, the frequency on which we had been controlled at Tangmere, without being changed at all, in France, appeared to get nothing else except the overseas service of the BBC. Which is quite pleasant.
Yes, but mixed up presumably with other things.
Mixed up with your own transmissions, yes.
Now, we've gone through the Scramble, and you've actually anticipated my question about RT. What about when you were flying? How did you think about the enemy, which of course you were calling bandits, which seems to sort of distance them in some way? Were they people? Were they machines? What were they?
No, I don't think they were people. We called them bandits. That was merely a code word which we were given when we were given the other code words, such as Scramble, meaning take off. Bandits meant either unidentified or enemy aircraft. Anything could be a bandit that was not definitely identified as friendly. We used the code word Angels for the height we were going to. Angels 15 was 15,000 feet. We had various ones like Buster for full throttle, and Saunter for throttle back and cruise at economical cruise, and Gate, which was absolute emergency full throttle. Through the gate, as we called it. You see, there was a gate on to stop you going into absolute maximum boost. And Bandit was never intended sort of to describe the aircraft or the people in it or anything like that. I can't remember the one offhand now what the Germans used, but it wasn't quite as emotive as the word bandit.
Was there any sort of chivalry? I mean, people have used this word about this time. Do you remember any sort of chivalry? Was there a code in which the way people fought? Were you tempted? Did you know of anybody being shot down after they'd bailed out, or shot at after they'd been bailed out, and that sort of thing? Were there any rules?
Don't know what you mean by chivalry. I mean, if it meant to give a man an even break, the answer was there was no chivalry at all. I mean, I much preferred to kill someone without him even knowing I was there. His first indication that he was being shot at was when bullets started coming out of his chest. You didn't give the chap an even break. You were there to get rid of his aeroplane, and incidentally him at the same time, but I tell you, that didn't really cross your mind that you were firing at a man. You were firing at an aeroplane of the wrong kind, wearing the wrong markings and flying in our sky, and we'd been told to get rid of them, and we got rid of them. There was no feeling about it. Not, at least I didn't have any feeling about it at all. I didn't go around hating Germans or liking Germans. I'd never met a German in my life, so I couldn't sort of have any preconceived opinion of what a German looked like or talked like or acted like. But I didn't hate them, I didn't like them. It was just that we were fighting them.
But what for?
Because we were told to fight them. We were told we were at war with Germany. I remember Chamberlain telling us we were at war with Germany, which didn't give me butterflies in the stomach, it gave me vultures in the stomach.
Yes, but if you said to people of 20 nowadays, we're at war with whoever you like, do you think there's going to be the same sort of feeling about it as you had at that time about being at war with Germany?
Well, you're asking, someone now who I think was looked upon as square and deadbeat and not in touch with the modern generation any longer. But I do think it would be different in so much as when we were young, we had parental authority. All of us listened to our parents. All of us did exactly what our parents wanted us to. There was none of the violence and assaulting of policemen going on then that goes on now. There wasn't such a thing as a hobby demonstrator, and I think that these demonstrators do it for something to do, rather than having any deep felt feelings about it. In fact, what they want to do is to argue against authority at any time, and if authority said you're at war with Germany, they would all then automatically say, no, we're not, we've got opinions of our own, and even though they're just the only opinions we have is that they're different to yours. And they're different to yours merely because you say something and we say the opposite, without any feelings on the matter whatsoever.
So for you, would it would the reverse be true, that you went to war simply because you were told to, without any feelings as to the rights or wrongs of it in that way?
No, I think that a lot of people there had got feelings. I was in the reserve because I could see a war. I was in the volunteer reserve because I could see a war coming, and I wanted to be trained when it started, not have to be conscripted and fight in an untrained condition. Lots of the pilots in the squadron felt that way about it. Were in the reserve for the same reason that I was. I also was in the reserve because I wanted to fly, and it would have been the only way I could possibly learn to fly, owing to the expense of, then as now, of learning to fly. And I think that we all felt that Great Britain was in the right. We also didn't want to be told what we were going to do by Germans, by Russians, by French, by anybody. I can't remember who it was who said my country right or wrong, and I think that's the way we felt about it, my country right or wrong. We were still British, and we were fighting for Britain.
Would you have even put it into words, this thought about what you were fighting for when you say your country, or would it have been taken for granted that everybody knew what you were talking about?
I think if I sort of said my country, everyone knew what we were talking about straight away. Our way of life, our physical ownership of the land, we weren't going to have Germans or anybody else owning it. I think that would still apply today.
But it wasn't, for the last few seconds, it wasn't a question of thinking, oh, if the Germans come here, we know what atrocities they will commit. It was just that you didn't want them here anyway, whatever they were going to do.
Yes, I was never really taken in by the propaganda that we pushed out about German atrocities. It was obvious the majority of it was propaganda, the same as the German propaganda which came back to us about how the British behaved. You couldn't recognise yourself in it.
Have you got any particular memories, by the way, of any particular dogfight?
I don't know. The so-called dogfights, I mean the aerial combats I had, which I have described ad nauseum. They only amount to one or two, which are usually picked out for me by the person who's talking to me. They know that I shot down the Heinkel at Buckingham Palace. They know that, well, it has become known, of course, that in my first fight I shot down 3 aircraft, and 2 aircraft, 3 in the morning. And that gets talked about a lot. But if I pick up my logbook now and open it up at a particular date, and I see what I've just made an annotation, 1109 destroyed or 1109 damaged, I cannot recall any way what that fight was like. It could be any one of a dozen.
How long were you up in the air, and how long did the combat last?
I would say the average length of time that the flight took would be about 30 to 40 minutes, with the fight lasting literally seconds to a minute or a minute and a half. During that time, the squadron usually managed to get split up completely. There would be an attempt made by the person who was leading the squadron to get them all together again. He would sort of say, rejoin over, and get a call from control saying, I've got no further trade for you, return to base. And then we would make no attempt to join up at all. We would each then navigate his own way back to Gravesend. Gravesend on a decent day was quite easy to find. You could see the river from miles away. And
what about Cloud? Presumably, when you got split up, you very often got lost in
Cloud? At that time, there wasn't all that amount of cloud. 1940 was a brilliant summer. You might be above a cloud layer, that meant you had to come down below it and find out where you were and set a course from there.
But very often your enemy was playing hide and seek if there was any cloud.
Could be, yes, especially if he was on trying to make his way back to France. Well, then he would make use of any cloud that he could possibly find.
And your object was to make use of the sun?
Yes, that was to make certain that no one ever got an even break. He couldn't see you coming from the sun. But the chances of being able to manoeuvre yourself into the sun, taking into account the fact that you might be coming from a down sun position where your airfield was. If you were taking off, say, in the afternoon, the sun was to the south where he was coming from. It's the southeast he'd probably be coming from. You were coming from the north, so you were visible to him. To get into the sun, you had to go around behind him and probably make quite a long tail chase of it to stay in the sun.
All records have been broken in the design and construction of the new Westland Army Corporation monoplane. Only 12 months ago it was just a blueprint, and here's the first public demonstration of the completed machine.
Well, hopefully you found that interesting, and in my next upload I'm going to take a look at some of the aircraft that were flying from RAF Portreath down in Cornwall during the Second World War. And here is a Lysander, Westland Lysander, which was based at RAF Portreath, and it's again genuine footage. And here is a quick look back at RAF Gravesend, where Ginger Lacey was flying from back in 1940. And well, I really hope you enjoyed it all, so take the greatest of care, and please have a subscribe, and look forward to seeing you on the next one. All the best, cheers for now.